the plant alive. And these storage structures might be true bulbs, like an onion, if you think about that, but that's something like a daffodil or tulip. With that, we see we have a dry leaf on the outside of the particular plant, and then fleshy leaves inside, and out of the center of the bulb comes our flower bud. In the center of the slide, we see a corm. An example of that would be something like a crocus. And it has a different structure, but we still kind of refer to it as a bulb, just like we do potatoes, which are tubers. There are many different types of bulbs. There's spring blooming, summer blooming, fall blooming, some that are hardy that can stay in the ground, which we will be talking about today, and tender bulbs. We're also going to be talking about mostly the spring flowering bulbs today. So for those spring flowering bulbs, the cultural requirements are that the soil is well drained. And we can imagine that because we don't want the bulb to sit in water where it could rot. The pH of the soil should be 6 to 7, and that's completed and known by going through a soil test that you can do through our extension office. And full sun. Now some of them can be planted under trees that in the springtime are not going to have leaves, but you still need to allow for some sun to strengthen that bulb for next year. Yellow cheerfulness is one of the daffodils. That's one of my favorite. It has multiple blooms on the stem and is one of those that's a little bit later in the season. To plant bulbs, some soils may benefit from bone meal, but it's not necessarily required. Because sometimes we want to plant something and think, what else do I need to purchase? So you wouldn't necessarily in our soils. In general, these bulbs are planted 2 to 3 times the diameter of the bulb. So that tells you how deep you need to plant them. Plant with the growing point up. If you're in doubt, just lay it on its side. Because sometimes, think of the bulb like a triangle. If you think of an onion, you can kind of look at where the center is. And from that, you can see the bottom, and sometimes you see the roots. If you put it upside down, it's not going to grow. Water the bulbs after we've planted them, because we want to get good soil contact with the bulb, so we'll start the rooting process early. And that gives it a better chance to grow and to produce beautiful flowers. Then mulch the bulbs as needed. Today we're going to talk about a variety of bulbs, and some of the smaller bulbs may not need mulch quite as deep because, again, we don't want to hold too much water around them. So after we have them planted, we're going to go ahead and fast forward to what spring might be. So when the foliage starts to emerge in the spring, we're applying 1 to 2 pounds of a 10-10-10, now that's fertilizer, per 100 square feet. So it's not a lot of fertilizer, but we want to do it just as it's peering out. Then we're going to fast forward and pass the beautiful blooms to a point where once it's finished, you see the finished flowers, those need to be removed. There's no need to cause the plant to try to form seeds. Many times it doesn't, but it also doesn't look very nice either. So just remove that stem down to the base where it comes out of the plant. But allow that foliage to die down naturally. It needs to be able to get all the sunlight to strengthen that bulb, because what it's also doing is producing another bulblet too, so that you can have more and more to share. By the pole in the picture all the way to the side, you can see some kind of looking like straw. Well, that's actually the foliage that has died down. So what you can do is put other perennials near it so that you can kind of hide it. And I like to plant some with daylilies because the foliage somewhat matches. But you could also put it with other perennials that as it starts to die down in yellow, you can kind of tuck it under it. But don't tie it up because, again, it won't be able to strengthen the bulb for next year. When is it time to divide the bulbs? Well, the plant will tell you. With the hand trowel in the center photo, you can see the bulbs already forcing themselves up. Those bulbs probably have been there for 5 or 6 years. So you might need to divide them every 3 to 4 years. So now with this particular bunch, I can divide those and expand my flower garden with my spring flowering bulbs. The other way it tells us is there are fewer flowers. In that clump, we see green, but we don't see very many flowers. So this tells us that we need to divide them. And division could have occurred already after they're dormant, so that might have been in July or August. But now, while I'm putting in some new bulbs, it's going to be time to go ahead and get those divided and moved as quick as possible because they are already forming roots. And you might ask, why do we have to plant them in the fall? Well, the bulbs require a cold period for their root growth, as you see in the first photo, and development of the flowers. If they don't go through a cold period, then the flowers will not come out and develop. So you just won't have anything but foliage. So these are some other pictures, such as the blue delft hyacinth, and the tulips are the same way. We have to have that cold period. These are some examples of spring flowering bulbs that you might want to put into your garden. They are available now through many times online and through some stores locally as well. One of my favorites that I just grew for the first time this year was the Allium giganticum. They are a little bit expensive, but well worth it. The flower scapes reach up to about 4 feet tall. There's just few pests. You can use it as a cut flower in the border, and it does produce its own offsets or little bulblets too. When you do divide bulbs, remember that the smaller bulbs will not necessarily bloom. They have to reach a big enough size before they'll bloom. And the other thing is when you're ordering bulbs, make sure they are top-sized bulbs. If you find that you're going to get many bulbs at an inexpensive price, that may not be the best purchase because they may not bloom for you. So the bigger the bulbs, the better it is. And when you divide, you'll know your bigger bulbs will be the ones that flower, and the smaller bulbs will flower in the next few years. This allium, which is in the onion family, is really a neat plant. Another plant I want to introduce you to is the Anemone blanda, or the Greek windflower. It's a small 4 to 6 inch tall plant, does bloom in the spring. It has either white, pink, or blue daisy-like flowers depending on the cultivar. It can be used in edging. I saw this plant in Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania one time, and it was just beautiful with the bleeding heart, which is another perennial. It has a tuber-like structure, and the key to planting this one is as soon as you get it, when you want to plant it, the night before, soak it in water. This helps then for it to be able to go ahead and start its growing process. And that way you are more successful. The kind of Daksa Lucilii is a glory in the snow. It's a small plant, about 4 to 6 inches tall. And it's really best if you plant them in groups, especially these short, small bulbs. It blooms in late March to early April, and I don't know about you, by the time we get to February, sometimes January, I'm looking for any sign of life. So it's neat to watch these come out early. So it could be a blue flower or a pink flower, but they do have the white centers. And then crocus. But I'm going to talk to you about this species crocus first. These are snow crocus. So these may be blooming in January or possibly even February. So plant these where you walk by and see them. I always get excited when I see my first snow crocus blooming in possibly February, and always have to tell my twins, hey, come look. I'm all excited about this plant. It's something to show sign of life. There's yellow colors and there's bicolor, so there's many available. Few pests, nice as a border, but just put it someplace where you can see it as you walk by or see it from the window of your home. And again, this one is actually not a true bulb, but from a corm. The Dutch crocus are the hybrid type crocus, just as beautiful. They bloom a little bit later in early spring, but not as early as the snow crocus. 3 to 5 inches tall. They're a little bit bigger in size, but again, as you can see, really effective planted in groupings. So if you're going to plant them in 3, 5s. Odd numbers are best. So it doesn't look like that you can pick out the flowers and count them. When you have odd numbers, it's definitely more pleasing to the eye. Few pests, and again, this is a corm. Another little gem that I like to call is the Uranthus Himalayas. This is the winter aconite, and you can plant this with some of the other bulbs as well. It is only about 3 to 5 inches tall, so you can see how it's best if it's planted in groups. Blooms in early March and has a little collar underneath the flower that sets it off. And yellow always reminds me of sunshine. And it's best if it's not planted in a soil that really dries out during the summer. And this one again is by a tuber instead of a bulb. Just a neat little plant. The snowdrop, the Galanthus Nyvalus, is another one of those that blooms very early in the spring. You can see kind of behind it, it is blooming with some of the daffodils, but it has this nice little flower that hangs down off of the little stem and just daintily hangs there. The flowers are white, just kind of tipped with a little bit of green. It can be used as a border, and again, it will be propagated by offsets or little bulblets. When I see the hyacinth, I just want to take in a deep breath because they are fragrant, very fragrant. So if its fragrance bothers you, this one might a little bit. But again, put it someplace where you walk by and can enjoy that fragrance. It could be in pinks and whites and blues, about 10 to 14 inches tall. They have few pests, but they do decline after a few years. So it's not quite as long-lived as something like the daffodils, but still well worth putting in your garden. It's great for containers too, to put something by your door as well. And it is pretty well, very slow to propagate. So don't anticipate having more bulblets like you will with daffodils. The iris reticulated is neat to start seeing this grass-like foliage emerging from the soil. Again, it's going to be in late winter, and you'll take a close look at it and say, what is that? What did I plant there? But as those little flowers come out, they're only 3 to 5 inches tall. It's just neat to see them emerging from the landscape. Use it in a border, and you can mix it again with some other spring flowers, or have it where you'll have another perennial then emerging later that's sort of in front of it. So with these spring flowering bulbs, you may not want to put them right in the front of your landscape, because then you'll have to look over the foliage as the plant dies down to return back to its life cycle and to become dormant through the summertime. Now the Dutch iris are also popular. It's very different than the iris reticulated. It is taller, 18 to 24 inches. It'll bloom in later spring as well. Has a variety of colors. Some other blues are also choices in this particular plant, and I like to use it as a cut flower. The grape hyacinth, the mascari, it is a plant that is small, only 4 to 8 inches tall. Those little flowers can also be used in floral arrangements too. What's unique is they do look like little grapes hanging down with a little white edge on it. The foliage is grass-like, and it does appear in the fall. It'll persist through the winter, but you just might have to remember that this particular plant will spread. So if you don't want it everywhere, what we do plant it, or you may not want to choose this one for your garden. But it is certainly a nice little addition in a blue flower. The stripeswill is another unique spring flowering bulb. It is going to be one early spring. It's only 4 to 6 inches tall. Again, it's better if it's planted in mass, and you can put it in a naturalized setting. With that, you might have a little area that's possibly closer to the edge of a tree, and it gives you that naturalized setting. Some of the bulbs that we see more of are that fall in this Narcissus genus. But I did want to introduce you to all of those other bulbs we sometimes called minor bulbs because they're small. The Narcissus as a genus name, and that's in Latin, so I can speak with anyone in the world and we know exactly what plant we're talking about. But many common names are daffodil, Easter flower, or jonquil. Jonquil is actually a group of Narcissus, and these Narcissus are grouped into about 12 to 14 different categories. And one of the categories is the jonquil, and these are fragrant. There are species and there are hybrids as well. They all can be in yellow, white, pink, single, double. There may be also, as you see pictured, a little bit of a salmon color, and the center photo is of a double. Then we might also have those that have a center that almost looks like an orange-red. So in daffodils, we can find from 3 to 18 inches tall, or maybe even taller. They have few pests. Deer usually don't like them unless that's about the only thing that's available to eat. You can use as a border. I love them as cut flowers. And as you saw in my previous picture, we can divide the bulbs from these offsets so we can share or expand our own gardens. I just wanted to share a few with you. Croton is a large flower, and you can see as planted in mass how effective they are. If you didn't want that big of a mass, or just now are starting out, then you might get about 5 to 15 bulbs, plant them in a spot, and over time you may have that big mass. Barrett Browning is a pretty one with this, we call it cup. The center of it is a cup, a shorter cup, and more of an orange flower. And Ice Follies, it's one of my favorite. It's a larger flower and taller. It ranges well. It's fairly early in the spring. And the cup will start out as a lighter yellow and then darkens to that yellow. So with Narcissus, just search the web just to get some ideas or get some catalogs. And there are many different possibilities and many different times that they bloom. So some of them even bloom February gold, will be, of course, like its name, February. Tete-a-tete is a short one, or jack snipe. They are short and do well in rock gardens. And when I talk about short, maybe only 8 inches tall. A little bit more difficult to arrange with, at least large ones. But I enjoy them once I see them and have a few to enjoy outside. Then I bring them in, put them in cool water in my vase, and enjoy them. Now the tulips, the hybrids and the species, there are many of those as well, with Blushing Lady and the Virgin's Gem. Some of those are species tulips, whereas on the other side of the border on the slide, we see a variety of tulip colors. They can be pink and white and red, and some of them almost a dark, really dark purple. Just, even though it's best treated as an annual, I still enjoy the tulips. With the tulip hybrids, I also wanted to make sure I showed you a double. There are parrot types. there's just a lot of tulips. And some of the research on what you would like. How tall do they get? What colors are they? If they are bicolor, meaning that the petal has two different colors in it, it actually, that was caused by a virus. And that's what caused the tulip mania, because the viruses are always very different in how it causes the petal color to, we call it, break. But nowadays we can use this just from propagation to keep those two colors coming through. Unfortunately, the hybrid tulips are not reliable for us to come back and give us that nice show. They need to be planted at the same depth to have them emerge all at the same time and at the same level. So at the botanical garden, possibly you might see a beautiful display of tulips. And this is how it starts, by excavating an area, especially if it's going to be large. You can do this in your own landscape too. Excavate a large hole for maybe 5 again through 7 tulips and plant them together. Again, these are propagated through offsets, but many times we're too warm. We don't give them a chance to strengthen their bulbs to come back reliably annually. So that's why you see in many places, even in Owensboro, after they're done blooming, they're removed. And we start all over. But I still include them in my garden as well. If you didn't want to have to plant a tulip, you might try a couple of the different species tulips. The Tulipa gregae is a tulip that has a pretty flower, and this particular one is red riding hood. And look at the foliage. The foliage has stripes of maroon or possibly purple. So you have 2 types of interest with these particular tulips. So the Tulipa gregae is what you're looking for. Another species tulips is the Tulipa Maniana. This is sometimes referred to as the water lily tulip. These species tulips have this variety of color, and you can use them for naturalizing. And they have that unique flower shape, a little bit different than what we normally see of the hybrid types that you might hear. Darwin is one of the particular hybrids that you find. And don't forget about bulbs in container. This particular container was layered with a variety of bulbs. You see the daffodils are just about finished, but the tulips are coming out really strong. What you need to do when you do the container is you can use potting soil, then take the tulips, they go a little bit deeper, then you put in a little bit of soil, then put in the daffodils, and then you can even put crocus on top of that. And remember that the bulbs only go in about 2 to 3 times the size of the bulb deep into the planter. So you're basically layering those different spring flowering bulbs. Just make sure they're not on top of one another so that they don't get pushed out of the pot. But this way, when you take this container, you can put it someplace close to the house. Don't let the container freeze. And you might even have to take the container and bury it in the soil, especially if it's a smaller container. You can do that to keep it from freezing. Then as you start seeing them emerge, take out the pot from the soil or take it away from an area that you've been protecting it, and put it out on the porch or on the patio and let the flowers bring their cheer. Especially in a time like this year, I'm really going to be looking forward to my spring flowering bulbs, so I didn't want you to miss out, knowing that you need to plant them now to enjoy them later.
Thank you so much, Annette. That was a lot of very useful information.
It's one of the topics that I really enjoy and love to share, because it just, at that time of year, you're looking for anything green.
Right, yes. I actually do have a few questions for you based on what you told us about. Early on, you said that small bulbs won't bloom. Can you give us like a size indicator for what makes a small bulb? small?
Understand, it kind of depends upon what you are planting. Some of the daffodils are just naturally small. Many times you can look at particular catalogs and they'll give you a bulb size and how many centimeters. So you really want to purchase the largest bulbs possible. When you're dividing the bulbs, then you can kind of see the difference in the bulbs. So you may have, you're looking at diameter and look for the words top size bulbs.
Okay, thank you. And that actually leads right into my next question. Do you have any place where you would recommend where people buy bulbs? I know you said catalogs and online, but if somebody's getting into it for the first time, that might be really overwhelming. So I didn't know if you had a specific place that you would recommend.
I really don't have a specific place. I think some of it, as you look at the catalogs, check to see the size of the amount that you're purchasing. Because some catalogs you can only purchase 25 bulbs. And that may be too much of something that you don't necessarily want that many. You want more of a variety. So
Okay.
go ahead and look at another catalog source. If you're just starting out and you're able, you may want to see what's locally available prepackaged. The other key is to pick up the package and gently squeeze the bulbs to make sure that they're not dried out, they're not mushy, because you don't want bulbs that are diseased. And then you can also kind of check to see the size. Again, if it's really cheap, it may not be what you want.
Okay, great. And one more question. I love to do my gardening in containers, so I was really listening when you were talking about that. And you mentioned several that are good for containers. Are all bulbs generally okay for containers as long as you protect them and don't let them freeze over the winter?
I think the easiest ones are the crocus,
Uh-huh.
the daffodils, and the tulips. And I think you can also do the iris reticulata, the small little iris.
Okay, and you said earlier that if you're doing a small pot, you want to make sure they don't come on top of each other. Bloom. Do you like recommend a size of a pot to use if you're, doing it for the first time and just want to make sure you do it correctly?
You might look at something that's possibly 10-inch in
Okay.
diameter. You could probably also do an 8-inch, but if you do an 8-inch, you may only be able to put maybe 3 daffodils and 3 crocus in a smaller pot.
Okay.
A 10-inch, because these pots, after they're finished blooming, and you want to again try to keep them alive as long as possible, and then just put them out in the landscape. They don't keep very well in the pots to bloom next year.
Okay, so you would then remove the bulbs and plant them in the landscape.
Right, especially after you try to let them die down naturally. Then you might be able to put a few more bulbs in the pot. But for the pot, you just kind of have to look at the bulbs and think about the size. 10 is a nice, 8-inch is good. Again, the smaller the pot, the faster it will freeze.
Okay.
Those you have to kind of protect more. You can put them up against the house. Watch so you don't have any voles or mice that might destroy them. So just keep an eye on them as well.
Okay, great. Well, I think that covers all the questions. Thank you so much, Annette. I appreciate you taking the time to be here and educate us on our bulbs.
It's my pleasure, and I hope that you'll enjoy your spring flowering bulbs too.
Yes, I think, like you said, that little flash of color when it's gray and gross out really lifts the moods. All right, have a great rest of your day, Annette. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome, and I'm always available at the Davis County Cooperative Extension Service. We're online as well as our phone number too.
Awesome, great. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.